A Democratic presidential candidate has hit out at Prime Minister Scott Morrison over his stance on climate change. Tom Steyer, who's currently sitting 8th in the race for the Democratic nomination, has criticised Scott Morrison over Australia's inaction on climate change, particularly in the wake of the bushfire crisis. Mr Steyer spoke with our political reporter Annalise Nielsen, who is in Iowa ahead of the caucuses next week.
Well, Kieran, I'm here in Fairfield, Iowa, one of the smaller events we've been to so far on the Democratic Caucus campaign trail, but it does seem like Tom Steyer has been putting in his time on the ground, meeting with so many voters, trying to get ahead. He has been lagging in the polls, but he does have some bold campaign promises that he's making to voters. He wants mandatory terms for congresspeople of 12 years, and on his first day in the White House, he says he would declare a climate emergency. He says his #1 priority is climate change action. I spoke to him here at Fairfield, Iowa's Cider House about what his priorities were for Australia in particular and our relationship as well as climate change.
I would make sure that we act together on our shared values, which have to do with freedom, democracy, and prosperity. And as far as I know where Australia is located. I know that it's really part of Asia. And so I want to make sure that our allies around the world, in particular Australia, understand that we are a trusted partner in every single minute of the word.
You said your #1 priority is climate change. You want to declare a climate change emergency on day one. We have a Conservative Prime Minister who's previously held up a lump of coal in Parliament, says we don't need to worry about reducing our climate emissions more than we already are, meeting our targets for the Paris Agreement. How would you work with him, do you think, on that really critical issue?
Well, it turns out, Annalisa, that I know how to read, and I know what's been going on in Australia, and I think he should eat his words, because Australia is actually the example of what we need to avoid. And I think the Australian people, I would go over to the Australian people and talk about what it is we need to do together, because that's an attitude that has to change.
We do only contribute about 1.3% of the world's emissions. America's much worse. Why should we be giving up so much when America could do much more with much less?
Well, let me put it to you this way. That's why I'm going to declare a state of emergency on day one and change what America does. Because when I want to go to Australia, I want to make sure that we're treating it as an emergency, that we're actually solving the problem here, so that when we talk to people in Australia, we can ask them to solve it with us.